Welcome everybody to my YouTube video. Today we are going to be changing out the power steering pump on a 2000 Jeep Cherokee XJ. We're going to be replacing the power steering pump and the high pressure and low pressure lines as well. First off, we'll go over all of the parts, show you everything that I bought to get this job done, and at the end we'll do a comparison of how much it cost versus how much it'll cost to do this at a repair shop. Second part is just the tools. All the tools that we need, nothing really special there. And then the third is we'll do a step-by-step on how to actually get this job done. And remember, I'm just an average guy with average tools and an average skill set. If I can do it, so can you. So, let's get started. Obviously, one of the first things you need to do is get all of the parts. So, let's look and see what everything is needed. First of all, have the actual lines. This one, as you can see, has the high pressure connectors on it. This will be obvious where it goes when we take everything off. Also, as I said before, I've got the low pressure line. Here is the low pressure line. This end here is just to a cut to length. I can see the O-ring there, which is good. That means everything came here. And we've also got the power steering pump. I went with a AC Delco remanufactured pump. Also got it with the tank already installed. Now, some people say you can just reuse your old tank. I'm not doing that because it's a lot more complicated, and I found that the easiest thing to do is just buy it with it already attached. One less thing to worry about. It's a little bit more money, but in the long run, it's going to be a better product. And because this is the original power steering pump on the Jeep, I got a new pulley. So we won't have to worry about taking the old pulley off, but we will need to worry about pressing this pulley on. That's it. The only other thing that's left is tools and then getting it done. All right, here's all the tools that we are going to be using. I'm sure I'm missing something, but this is going to be the gist of it. Obviously, we have a drain pan, something to catch it and dispose of it properly. I have a 5/8 wrench, 13 millimeter, a 15 millimeter, 13 socket deep, 13 socket shallow. I have an 8 millimeter, and I have the pliers with a 90-degree bend. That's going to be to remove the spring clips that are original to the Jeep. Everything else will come as it comes. If I miss anything, I'll be sure to add it as well. The first thing that I'm going to do is remove this electric fan. Some people do it, some people don't. I see that it's in the way, and I really don't want to be fighting this. I don't have the time or the patience to do that, so I'm just going to remove it. 2 screws up top here, clips on the bottom. There's the second. You can see it's already loose, so that can just tuck back there. And then the important part, this clip that's right there. You can see it. And that clip just needs to be removed. And then once that's removed, I'll pull the whole thing out. Got the fan out. One thing that I also did here, as you can see, I removed the tube that is the return tube back to the overflow tank, just to get that out of the way too. No sense in leaving that on there. Makes a lot of sense to remove that here. Now, the next 2 bolts that we're going to be removing, this one right here, this one right here, they are both 15 millimeter. To get to this one, I was originally just going to use a socket wrench, but that doesn't really make a lot of sense. There's not a lot of room to maneuver in there. So unplug the fuel rail, and I have a 15 millimeter shallow socket, but what I have is a wobble extension. Now that will allow me to get it on here. So that, and in combination with the wrench down here, we'll be able to remove those. One of the most important tools that everybody can use, a little rubber mallet. You can see right here, I have the closed end of the socket wrench on it, but it's really tough. So easiest thing to do is just give it a few taps, take it off, give it a few more taps until it turns by hand. Always a good idea to have your BFH lying around. One of my quirks that I always like to do is not remove the bolts all the way. So I have that one, it's loose, it's not quite finger loose, but I wanted to leave it there. Right now it's the best place to keep it. So I've moved on to the bracket bolt over here. That's actually what puts tension on the system with this, in addition to the tensioner pulley, which is down here. So these two in combination are what puts tension on the whole thing. So I'm loosening that up as well. All right, got the tensioner pulley off. Now slip the serpentine belt off, and I'm just hooking it right here for now so that I don't have to unhook it or restring it later. That seems to be the best way to do it. So we'll just put it there and secure it underneath the hose. Now the bolts for the power steering pump are actually accessed through these three holes. You can see them right in there. So there's one, so on and so forth. It goes all the way around. So you just line them up to undo that. However, the power steering pump is solid and rigidly mounted now. So I'm going to remove this because it's going to be a lot easier to do it now than it would be when this is flopping around. Specs call for this to be a 16 millimeter. I don't have a 16 millimeter. It's actually really common for metric wrench sets to not have a 16 millimeter. Now, I have a friend who's got some tools, and he had one of the ones that has kind of the lobes on it. So it's a 16 millimeter and a 5/8. So that gave me the idea to check and see whether or not a 5/8 fits. And 5/8 fits. So I'm not sure whether or not 16 millimeter is exactly 5/8, but for our purposes, it's close enough. Now this one, I'm going to try to do it by hand, and it works. It's actually really good. As you can see, there is a ton of power steering fluid here, so it's really good for anti-corrosion, but it's also good to lubricate everything. So hasn't been a chance for any rust or corrosion or dirt or anything to kind of build up in there because of all of the power steering fluid that's sprayed everywhere in there. So I'm going to go ahead and loosen this up now. All right. So I've got this loosened about as far as it'll go. Yep, it's out. You can actually see in between the threads there. So now that that is out, all I need to do is just pop this out. Now it's going to take a little bit of pressure because there is an O-ring down there. So it's actually good that the O-ring is still sealing it, but be prepared for that. That is the reason why we have the catch pan down below. Now I'm just gonna, I don't particularly care about where it's leaking here because most of this is going to be replaced. So just let it drain out a little bit there. I might use a pump or a turkey baster to remove some of the fluid there, but that's it, that's done. Now the next thing is going to be the low pressure line on the back. All right, this one is a little tricky to get to. I've lit it from the bottom so we don't have any shadows there. Hopefully you can see what's going on, but I have the pliers here and they are on the pinch clamp. Now I can do that and then just move it down. Now, I personally like pinch clamps. I know a lot of people don't. I'm gonna try to reuse that, but if I can't reuse it, then I did buy some regular hose clamps to be able to put on there. Now, the next part is the tricky part. That is getting this hose off. So, this is the reason why I did not loosen the bolts even a little bit on the power steering pump. because as much as I was yanking on the high pressure, the return line is, again, original, which means that it's had a long time and I can't get to it from underneath, so I'm just gonna have to wiggle it from the top. But it's had a long time to sit on there. Now, one thing that we might end up having to do is just cut the hose. I'm hoping we don't have to, but if we do, then that's what we'll do. So I have to take back everything that I just said about not cutting the pipe, because I actually do have to cut the pipe. So I just got a rusty old knife that I'm going to be using to cut it. And actually, if you look, hopefully you can see enough detail, it's already splitting. So again, we're not saving this, so it doesn't really matter. So I'm just going to kind of score it a couple times. And I can feel it underneath the screwdriver blade. So score it, wiggle the screwdriver down. The hardest part is the reinforcement. Once that's done, you can see it there, and you can see the mess starting to come, which is exactly what I was thinking was going to happen. So good news is that it's actually draining on a pretty steady stream, so I'm going to redirect it here with the screwdriver. So it doesn't cover 100% of the undercarriage of my vehicle. It only covers 90% of the undercarriage of my vehicle. Okay, now the next part is to actually remove the power steering pump. We're finally at that stage. Now, the easiest way, or at least the way that I'm going to do it, because I think it's the easiest, is to start on the bottom. Now, I've arranged or aligned these holes to line up with the bottom bolt. And I put it on, and I just undo it all the way. Now, there are two more bolts, 3 total. One right here, which you can see fairly easily. And the bottom one was just as loose, so that's good. And then the last one, which I need to turn that just a little bit to line up, is right here. So none of those bolts gave me any kind of grief, which is good. Again, the only advantage to having power steering fluid go through this entire area here is that it lubricated everything for me. So as you can see, I can turn it by hand, so that's great. So I will get all of these off, and then we'll remove the pump. Okay. So I had to remove the socket and the extension from the the socket extension and the wrench from the socket because it's too long, but I can turn it by hand at this point. It's super easy. So just a couple more turns and I should be able to get the whole thing off. Once I've got this whole thing off, then this will come all the way out. Okay. Should be out. Yep. I just need to pull it out. Now, I'm not sure whether or not these bolts are different lengths or not, so I have arranged them. I'm not sure if it even matters, but I've arranged them on my workbench so that I can put them back in exactly the same order they came out. And here we go. One power steering pump removed. Now we're going to be removing the power steering lines, the high pressure and the power steering, the low pressure, the return line from the steering gear down here. Now, of course, I didn't anticipate that this was a different size, so I'll add this to the list of tools again, but this is 18 millimeter that I'm using down here. Now, the good news is that even though there was no fluid down here, or very little fluid, they actually turn fairly easily, and actually that one's should already be loose. And this one's loose enough to turn by hand. I've already pre-loosened them up. Yeah, there we go. So, there we go. That one's out. Now, of course, you're going to have some fluid coming out. So if you can, angle it all down to your catch pan. Hopefully you didn't remove your catch pan. And I've got that one out. So that one is good to go. And I'm just taking all of these parts that are dirty and putting them into the catch pan, because if they drain, then they can just go right into there. And then we've got this one here, which is actually finger loose now too. Oh, there we go. Okay, so there's a little bit draining out there. And that's it. We've got both of them loose now. So I'm going to do a little bit of cleanup here. I've already done some cleanup over on the power steering mount on the bracket itself. Now that I've got this, I'm going to clean up around here, and then we'll have some clear, clean area to put all this stuff back into. The instructions say that you need to dip this into clean power steering fluid. So I just filled up the cap and dipped it onto my finger, and I'll dip it again so it's really obvious that you can see it, so you can see how shiny it is there. And then you just kind of coat the O-ring in it. I don't really think that it matters whether or not it's clean or dirty. You just don't want to have, when it say dirty, it's not dirty fluid, it's just used fluid. So I don't think that's that big of a deal, but always better to err on the side of caution. So there, now it's on. So this one is going to go to this right here. That is the high pressure. Then the low pressure is going to go to here. So same maneuver, I just put the O-ring on and bolt them in. The high pressure came off last, which means it needs to go on first because it's going to go under the low pressure. So high pressure first, then the low pressure. I'm putting this in now, and before I go any further, I wanted to just take a moment. It's not screwed in all the way, but it's getting there. And I wanted to take a moment because this part right here, the flange nut that's going in there, it is brass, which means it's soft. And you need to be very careful to not cross thread. If you cross thread, you can not only screw this up, which means you're going to need a new high pressure line or a low pressure line, whichever one you're working on. But if you screw up the threads, as unlikely as that is, you could, if you're putting pressure on it the wrong way, and then you're screwing up your steering gear. You screw that up, and you turned a 2-hour or hour and a half project into an all-day project by replacing this. So be careful when you're putting this in. I am just putting a little bit of pressure this way on it, so it's not I'm putting pressure basically on the cable, so it relieves the pressure onto the nut, and then I turn it in by hand. And by doing that, I guarantee that it's not going to get cross-threaded. Do everything by hand until you can't, then break out the tools. I wanted to take just a moment because I actually got confused on it and I had to go back over my video to make sure that I was doing it right. I have everything in the right spot, but it's really easy to confuse what goes over what. And the easiest thing to do is take pictures before you start, kind of like I did by having this video. But this is the way, I don't have it, I have this one threaded in partially and I don't have this one threaded in at all. But the key here is that this one has to move like this so that this one goes over the top. If you don't have that crisscross pattern there, it's not going to work. So I just wanted to take a moment to say that because you, while you're doing this, may run into that and you'll be like, I'm lost, I don't know where I'm at, I don't know which one's which, and I'm not sure if this one is the same size as this one, if it's as idiot-proof as possible, but even if it is different sized on the diameter on the inside of it, so that it is idiot-proof, at least in that part, lining it up so that it all goes back together in the same way you took it out is not idiot-proof. So, as I found out when I had to go back and look through my videos. So, take a picture ahead of time, make sure that you can see exactly what it was, and you can benefit, just like I did, from what goes where. Okay, I've got it tight here. I got it finger tight as much as I could. Like I said before, tighten it as much as you can with your fingers. And then this one, I don't think I even got a full turn on it, maybe 3/4 of a turn. This one, I got probably a full turn, maybe a little bit more. But again, it's brass, so you want to make sure that you don't overturn it. But yeah, I mean, I don't want to put too much pressure on it because it could easily strip it out. And like I said, you have a lot more problems on it than just this. And the nice thing about this is that if for some reason it's not tight enough, you can always tighten it up. So we had a leak. Now we want to make sure there's obviously not a leak, but this is a really easy thing to fix. So that's done. The cables are all routed, and I'm going to back it up a little bit here on the view so that we can reinstall the power steering pump, which goes right over here. Okay, now we're going to be putting on the pulley onto the new power steering pump. We didn't have to take the old one off because I just got a new replacement one. All the other stuff was original, so again, while I'm at it, let's just go ahead and replace all the parts. So I rented the tool from a local auto parts store, and all I have to do is use this, screw it in, and then screw it down. Now, after much debate as to which side is which, this one is the top side. And the reason why this is the top side is because when you look at the puller, there actually has a ring on here, and it's hard to see here, but you can see that my finger goes underneath the lip, and that's how you pull it off. So if that was on the other side, we'd never be able to get this pulley off. So, logical deduction, this side right here is the top side. So, the nice thing also about it is this is self-limiting, so it won't go any further than flush. So I screw it in, get it snug. Now, the bigger of the two is a 17 millimeter, and the smaller of the two is the 9/16. So keep the 9/16 steady and turn the 17 millimeter, and that pushes it on. So it's on, and as we were saying before here, it is self-limiting, so can't go down any further than that. The pump pulley turns freely, and there is a gap in there, so everything is good. You should be able to see that it can spin freely and that there's a little bit of a gap there. So all we've got left to do is install it, and we're done. Looks like we're ready to install the power steering pump, the new power steering pump, back in. So I've got the power steering pump. I'll just put it back into place exactly the same way the old one came out. And remember, I saved the bolts. Well, of course I saved the bolts, but I saved the position of the bolts. That's the important part. So I rotate the hole in the pulley, line up the power steering pump, get it to where I can thread it just a little bit. Again, do what you can with fingers. Look at that, it's in. So now I've got one more to go here, and then one down on the bottom, and then the power steering pump is in. Then we're ready to put in the connectors, the pressure lines on the front and the back. So I've got all the bolts in, and I don't want to over torque them. I don't really have, if it has a torque spec, I'm not sure what it is, but the torque spec is really low. So basically just want to get it to where it's hand tight. And by that I mean, you know, you're not smacking it with a hammer or whatnot. But I've got all three tight, and we're ready for these connections here. Now, the connections for the power steering, the high pressure power steering line, has the same O-ring set up there. So I need to put the O-ring on there, dip it in the clean power steering fluid, and wiggle it in there. Okay, just like before on the bottom ones, this is brass, which means it's soft, so we don't want to over tighten it. So I'll just put it in there, and you kind of wiggle around the stiff part of the tube so that you're not putting pressure on the thread as it's going in. And if you have to back it up a little bit, that's okay. Looks like I've got a really good start there. And again, same thing. Get it as tight as you can with your fingers, and then we switch over to tools when we need to. All right, now yell at me if you want. You can definitely do that in the comments. But I am reusing the pressure clamp right here, and I've slid it on past where it's going to go onto the return line, and it just clamps or slides right on, and then slide the clamp up. Fortunately, I didn't really have to cut any material off. This was sized pretty well. Now the good thing is that this is brand new. That is on there super tight. So hopefully I'll never have to do this again, or if I do have to do it again, it's in a very long time, which is the point.
It was 180,000 miles before I had to do this. So, and the only reason why I had to do it is because of driving without power steering, or driving without a power steering because of the serpentine belt. So I've got it on there. The clamp is now all the way up at the top, almost at the top. Got a good connection. We're done with that. So we've got all of the hoses, all of the clamps, all of the screw connectors. I tightened this one up. I tightened the high pressure one up. So we've got everything done. The only thing that's really left is to put the serpentine belt on, the tensioner pulley, and I'll be back after I get all of that back on, and we'll talk about what we're gonna do with the actual reservoir for putting in and bleeding the system. One note that I do have about the tensioner bolt that's on here, I've got it tight to where I can't move the belt, really. There's a tiny little bit of give, but not really. You don't want to do it too tight. You can always tighten it later if it squeals or something like that. So I would put it on, and if you hear it and it starts squealing because the belt is slipping, just come back here, give this a couple more turns, and you'll be fine. Just get it to the point where it doesn't squeal anymore. You're set. And then plug your temperature sensor. I said before that's a fuel rail. Obviously it's not. It just goes right next to the fuel rail. But plug your temperature sensor back in, and everything is reconnected. Now, remove the filler plug that came from the manufacturer and see whether or not the original fits. I've heard some horror stories about some of them fitting and some of them not. Good news is this one fits. So super dirty original cap on brand new clean hoses and power steering pump reservoir. So that's good. That means that we're going to be able to have pressure. So we just need to fill it up. Okay, so you just need to top it off. And I am taking extra careful precautions here so I don't get my nice clean new system. So just make sure that it's got enough in there. The gauge that's on there has the lines. Let's put it in, take it out, measure. Perfect. It's right at the high level. So, there's air in the system right now, guaranteed, because the lines don't have any in there. So some of this fluid is going to go into there. So filling it up to the high line is fine. I don't want to overfill it because it'll froth it, and we definitely don't want that. So just cap it back up, seal it, and then we're going to jack up the front of the vehicle. So we're just going to make sure that the axle is jacked up. You can either put something on the axle tubes on each side or jack it from the pumpkin, and you just want to get it high enough so the wheels aren't touching. And then we're going to start the Jeep and crank the wheel over 3 or 4 times, hard right, hard left, hard right, hard left, and then check again. Okay, so now the proof is in the pudding here. We're going to turn it on. All right, so that's good. It starts. I didn't disconnect the battery, but I did have some accessories running off the battery this whole time. So now I'm going to do full lock left, full lock right, and then back again, and then we'll turn it off, and then we'll check. What was that?
I think we blew a line.
Really? That pop was the low pressure line having way too much pressure and popping off. The awesome part about it is that it sprayed power steering fluid everywhere, and of course my power steering didn't work. I turned it off as quickly as possible and started tracking down what could possibly be the cause. And one of the things that I was looking at was a blockage in the return line. And trying to think of where that blockage could be, looked on the brand new power steering pump, and I mistook that rubber plug that comes from the factory as a lip for the low pressure line to seat onto. So my mistake, totally my bad. Although I will say in this case, I think it's a good thing that I used the squeeze clamp, the pressure clamp, as opposed to the ring clamp, because it popped off fairly quickly and was able to relieve that pressure. If I would have used a super tight ring clamp, it would have failed somewhere else, and it could have blown a line, it could have blown the power steering pump, or worse, it could have blown the steering gear. So fortunately, having that on there was the weak point, which is good in this case because that popped off, and that's what that super loud bang was. So you'll see that there's some plastic on here, doing that in an effort to maintain a seal because there is still fluid in here. And I'm going to remove it. I've cut it and I've scooted it down as far as I can without it coming off. And I'm going to scoot it all the way off and then put the clamp, or excuse me, put the hose back on and then clamp it. So it's all a matter of getting everything done quickly. So I put the plastic on there to try to minimize the drippage. There's still some, but put the hose on. And that's what I forgot to take off. So this little devil here is what caused me all that problem. So hopefully didn't cause any damage. The proof again is going to be in the pudding. You should be able to see all the spray pattern that is here. The spray is on the hood, the front of the Jeep, and the ceiling here. So on the camera, it's just about everywhere. So I'm going to do a little bit of cleanup here now that I've got that line on, and we'll try it one more time. All right, literally take 2 on this. I'm going to start it up. Heard a tiny little bit of a squeak. That squeak is because there's fluid everywhere. Okay, I'm letting it sit. I'm not doing anything. So far, so good. Of course, I really shouldn't be pumping too much. So now I'm going to try to turn. Good news, it's turning. It's turning very freely. I'm turning all the way to the left. Full lock. Okay. I'm going to go a little faster this time. Go all the way to the right. Okay, that's 1. All right, that's the second one to the left. And the second one to the right. I'm going to get it back to center and turn it off.
Let's talk about cost. If you're going to end up doing this yourself, you're going to spend about $150 in parts. I got all of my parts from Rock Auto and Amazon. Might be a little bit more, a little bit less, depending upon sales. And I did get a remanufactured as opposed to a new power steering pump. Now, I had a repair shop locally give me an estimate, and they are wanting $870 to do this same repair. Now, they're probably using a brand new power steering pump, but the difference in price hurts. That's a lot of money. Even if you were to buy a new power steering pump, you could be saving $500 or more on doing it yourself versus paying somebody. The question is, how much is your time worth? Takes about 45 minutes to do it, maybe an hour if you do the full fluid drain. So if you have an hour to spare, this is for you. You can save a lot of money doing it this way, and you can use that money to do other things that you enjoy or invest it back into your Jeep. However, if you are so busy that you can't have any spare time, you don't have any time to devote doing this job, then it would be in your best interest to pay somebody to do it. Now, I don't have any special tools. I don't have any special automotive skills. And if I can do it, so can you. Thanks for watching.